Let's dive into the newscast with all the latest coming in and of Wion's continuous coverage on UK elections. Boris Johnson wanted a mandate to get Brexit done. And that's exactly what he's got, courtesy of the British public. A huge majority in the House of Commons should make it reasonably easy for Johnson to push through his Brexit deal. During his campaign, Boris had made some tall claims, but getting Brexit done, this means you can expect the Brexit deal to be presented again in the Parliament next week. And before Christmas, the lawmakers will vote on the deal, and considering his brute majority, this should be relatively easy. And come January 31st, Britain will have officially left the European Union. But believe it or not, this is the easy part. After the official divorce, Britain will have to negotiate a free trade agreement with the EU. Now, Boris says that he will negotiate a free trade deal before 2021, but many experts feel that this is too much of a tall claim to ask. Let's jog your memory a bit over here. What are the salient features of Johnson's Brexit deal? If you remember, the Irish backstop was the death knell for former Prime Minister Theresa May. But Johnson has ruled out a hard border. Under his deal, Northern Ireland will remain in UK's customs territory, but will be partially aligned with the EU single market. Trade between Northern Ireland and UK will not be subject to any EU tariffs. There are many outstanding financial settlements between UK and EU, and Boris Johnson's deal lays out a mechanism to calculate what UK owes the EU. The figure is estimated to be somewhere around 40 billion euros. Caught in the crossfire, of course, are the people. UK nationals in the EU and EU nationals in the UK will continue to enjoy their social security rights. But one thing there is some ambiguity about is the movement of UK nationals within Europe. During the transition period, UK will continue to come under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. That's the Brexit deal in a gist. But without signing a free trade agreement with the EU, the separation will not be complete. Johnson has made it clear that he wants a clean divorce from the EU single market and customs union. But time is not in his favour. This trade deal is unprecedented. Never before has the EU negotiated a free trade deal with an external country in such a short period of time. While many in the EU feel an extension beyond 2020 is necessary, Boris has ruled it out. This means that the two sides must iron out differences and get the deal ratified by all EU members. All of this under 1 year. Johnson's huge majority makes all these complexities a bit more plausible, but underestimating Brexit is a mistake that Boris cannot afford to make. Remember, this is a deal that has consumed 2 prime ministers and more than 3.5 years of British politics. With all the developments happening since it's official now that Boris Johnson will be taking to power yet again, let's get in some perspective. And for that, I'm joined in by a very special guest in the Wion studios at the moment. I am joined in by Mr. Jasper Reid, who is a political analyst. A very warm welcome to you, Jasper. How do you view the current outcome of the UK elections? Do you see that Brexit has been one huge driving force behind the votes, and that the outcome has been a clear, resounding mandate on Brexit itself?
Good morning, Akansha. I think certainly Brexit has been the all-consuming topic in many ways. It's not the only topic. The other topic, of course, is the performance of Mr. Corbyn and the Labour Party generally. And to that extent, Boris Johnson has had the rub of the green. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn has had nothing short of a disastrous campaign. He hasn't come across well, he hasn't convinced anyone, and he's lost a host of seats that haven't been lost from Labour to the Conservatives in generations. But you're right that Brexit has been, Brexit's like the kind of Death Star. It's sort of sucked everything into it, and there hasn't been much else debate, frankly.
And as you pointed out, the Labour, of course, has been staring at a catastrophic defeat. Do you think Jeremy Corbyn is to be blamed for this? And what do you see in terms of the future for the Labour Party now? A lot of introspection?
Yes, more than introspection. Introspection is one of these kind of weaselly political terms. Jeremy Corbyn needs to stick his hand up and say that if not wholly responsible for this loss, he is largely responsible for it. Every poll, every political commentator, including Mandy, your own bureau chief in London, will tell you that it was fine on the door for a lot of Labour candidates until you mentioned Jeremy Corbyn. And then people glazed over or steam came out of their ears. And he's got to own up to that. So by all means, introspection. But they're going to have a difficult problem. They're a bit like the Congress Party at the moment. They can introspect all they like. But they've had an absolute shellacking, and they're not going to get back for a long time.
That's an interesting parallel that you've drawn between the Congress in India and the Labour Party. And since you mentioned Mandy in London, let me quickly go across to Mandy Clark, who's also joining us on this live broadcast in London. Mandy, what are the live updates that you're getting? We believe that it is official now that Boris Johnson is finally taking, or rather is going to continue living in 10 Downing Street.
Oh, absolutely. It's official. He's got a very strong majority, and we're just, those last kind of seats are coming in. We're just seeing about how strong that majority is. It looks like at least 40 seats. So it's completely changed the political landscape this election. It's going to be dominated by the Tories. It will allow Boris Johnson free rein to get the Brexit deal that he wants, and we'll get a very clear idea if he is a softer Brexit or if he's a hardline Brexiteer. He was kind of pushed in a corner when he had before the election, because he had to appease a lot of those far right Brexiteers and the DUP. Now he's a free hand, so we'll get a much better idea on this, perhaps a softer Brexit he wants, or perhaps that harder Brexit. But it has completely changed the political landscape.
Right. Mandy, something that Jasper and I were just discussing was what actually emerges out of this election is not just the fact that this entire outcome has been a mandate on the Brexit itself, but also the downfall of the Labour Party. What was it that actually made the Conservatives break through the stronghold of the Labour?
I think the problem was probably twofold. One was the Labour strongholds were also strong Leave voters, and so the Conservatives were able to get leeway there. But of course, it was the Labour leader himself who was just unpopular, and also sometimes referred to as Marmite. Some people love him, some people hate him, but the majority of Labour voters certainly took a great dislike to him. It was an issue at the doorstop for a lot of the Labour MPs that they just did not connect with Jeremy Corbyn. He wasn't a great speaker. He was unclear on his policies on Brexit. I think all those factors combined, the lack of leadership in Labour and also their position on Brexit, really gave the Tories a very, very strong position.
All right. On that note, let me quickly go back to Jasper. Jasper, do you think Jeremy Corbyn's views on anti-Semitism or even his views on Kashmir have placed him on the back foot, especially when it comes to ethnic minorities?
Well, it doesn't look good for him, and not apologising, at least on behalf of his party, if only for the hurt that was caused, looks pretty undignified. I'm not sure whether in the end it was a huge factor here. It would be a very specific factor amongst the Jewish community, or very possibly the Indian voters. But I think it was fundamentally a marginal issue. But I think it was part of a broader theme here. You know, he was mealy-mouthed on his position on Brexit. When he was asked to condemn anti-Semitism in his party, he dodged the issue. And he's gone from being someone who was seen as very authentic in many ways and was able to give Theresa May a good bashing, into someone that people fundamentally don't trust. And I'm afraid the whole kind of edifice of him and John McDonnell and their union supporters has rather fallen down overnight. Long way back from here.
All right. So while we speak, Donald Trump, who is very active on Twitter, of course, no political development in the world is complete without Donald Trump reacting to it. And so now he has congratulated Boris Johnson. And this is what he has to say. Congratulations to Boris Johnson on his great win. Britain and the United States will now be free to strike a massive new trade deal after Brexit. This deal has the potential to be far bigger and more lucrative than any deal that could be made with the EU. Celebrate Boris. It's quintessentially Donald Trump out there. And since he's congratulating Boris Johnson at the moment, let me go back to Mandy. when it comes to speaking about Boris Johnson. Mandy, what's the mood like within the Conservatives, and what do we expect now that the Conservatives are all set to prove the majority?
Oh, the mood will be buoyant among the Conservative Party. Really, it frees their hand. That they were so tied with the previous Parliament that they couldn't get anything through. So now, you know, they have the entire mandate. But what we did see is that before this election, Boris Johnson really did push out any kind of more liberal-leaning Tory politicians, and there was that really divided the party. Right now, it will be a very buoyant mood, but it will be interesting to see whether the Conservative Party will remain more right-leaning, or if it will be, as he says, one nation conservatism.
All right, Mandy, thank you so much for bringing us all those latest updates from London. We will keep coming back to you. You've been very sincerely giving us all those live updates since very early morning. Jasper, we're talking about Boris Johnson right now. What do you think it means? What does it mean for UK to have a Brexit under Boris Johnson?
Well, I think as Mandy's saying, Akansha, it slightly remains to be seen whether, with this type of majority and that type of leverage, whether he's a softer Brexiteer or he's a harder Brexiteer. What he has overnight, which he hasn't had for the last several months, is some options, Akansha.
Do you think that the challenge has ended, or it is going to go further when he takes the new deal that he's struck with the EU over to the Parliament?
It's only just beginning. I mean, it's only just beginning, and he's got 11 months to conduct an extremely complex negotiation. Having said all of that, anybody negotiating knows, especially our friend Donald Trump, that if you don't have power and you don't have leverage, you shouldn't be at the table. And the UK has been at the table without power or leverage for the last several years. Now, it's interesting then about, you know, once we find out what kind of Brexit they're looking for, is who really holds the whip hand. I should think that on the one hand, Europe is celebrating the fact that someone's actually coming back with a mandate, and whether that changes their mind about the deal they want, let's see.
All right, we're also joined in by Lord Meghna Desai. Let's quickly go across to Lord Desai for more details and get in some perspective. Lord Desai, a very warm welcome to you here at Wion. Lord Desai, you've written a book, Politics Shock, Trump, Modi, Brexit and the Prospect for Liberal Democracy. Do you agree that today's political development is a reiteration of the New World Order? All right, we seem to have lost Lord Desai's audio, and we will go back to him with this question for now. Jasper, you know, now that Boris Johnson will remain in 10 Downing Street, how do you see the relationship panning out between India and the UK?
Well, I think Boris Johnson, I think it's an encouraging thing, and personally I feel no two nations should be closer on earth. Boris Johnson has some Indian heritage himself. He's always spoken very positively and warmly about it. And of course, he has every incentive now to strike deals outside of Europe. Now, whether India actually has the same incentive, I should think they'll be in the same spot, waiting to see what happens with Europe. But there are deep links between the countries. He did positive things like extend the working period for Indian students, which have been knocked down to 1 year to 2 years. So I would be quietly optimistic about it, but I think it's a year away before he can make any real progress.
All right. And how do you see the entire outcome? How do you view the Indian diaspora having impacted the outcome of today's election result? We've already seen the Labour Party and the Conservatives going all out there to woo the Indian diaspora, be it using Hindi or religion as a pitch to woo voters. How do you think the Indian diaspora has impacted today's outcome?
Well, I'd like to see the numbers. I mean, it's always the case the Indian diaspora and the non-resident Indian community is a very meaningful part of any general election. In the simple sense, it's a very meaningful part of the UK. Look, I think here, you know, it's a community that has made a bigger contribution than any ethnic group to the UK. It's an enterprise-driven community. It's an international outlook community. And there's a good fit between that and Boris Johnson and Conservatism. I would have thought, and traditionally that type of group has not really voted Labour, I would have thought that Jeremy Corbyn was a huge turn-off for them.
All right. And while we speak, Jasper, we are also joined in by Lord Meghnad Desai. We were trying to reconnect with Lord Desai. He's back with us on air. Lord Desai, welcome to you. I wanted to ask you, do you agree that Brexit has actually spoken up through today's elections and that today's outcome is a mandate on Brexit itself?
Absolutely. It's not only a mandate on Brexit, but Boris Johnson has now secured one of the largest majorities we have known in the post-period for the Conservative Party, and he'll be there for 5 years, and he could even be for 10 years. It's a huge victory for the Conservatives and a big defeat for the Labour Party.
Right. As somebody who was associated with the Labour Party, how would you analyse today's catastrophic performance?
Well, basically, we always had a problem that a rebellious backbencher like Jeremy Corbyn had been elected leader of the Labour Party because we had changed the rules on electing because we allowed a lot of ordinary members to vote. Now, in 2017, in the last election, we had thought that Jeremy Corbyn would lose massively and resign, but at that time, Theresa May proved to be totally incompetent. So Labour Party won seats. That gave us a delusion that maybe it will work. But this time we have been shown that people do not like Jeremy Corbyn. Even Labour Party supporters don't like Jeremy Corbyn. And there are a lot of other objections to him. So we have been very soundly defeated. And very soon we will have to do something about changing leadership drastically.
All right. Also, Lord Desai, what is it that led the Conservatives to break the Labour stronghold, particularly the Red Wall?
Well, because we had a lot of Brexit supporting voters, Labour voters in the north of England, the so-called Red Wall. And the Labour Party did not have a clear policy either one way or another on Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn himself is a Brexiteer, but he wasn't allowed to say it because quite a lot of the southern England middle class members were all Remainers. So we had a very confused message, and Boris Johnson had a simple, clear message. He only had one message, which he went on repeating up and down: get Brexit done. And people liked the simplicity of the message. He is charming a person. He may not be trustworthy, he may not tell the truth, but everybody knows that people still like it. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, whatever he says, people believe, and nobody likes it. So it's a real contrast in personality.
Right.
And
all right, Lord Desai, thank you so much for sharing your precious perspective with us here at Wion. Jasper, you just heard what Lord Desai had to say, and he's, of course, acknowledging this disastrous defeat that has taken place. But when it comes to the Conservatives' victory, do you think that somehow focusing on Brexit and to get Brexit done finally has somehow deflected attention away from other issues of perhaps more prominence, probably, something like what we were talking about earlier when it comes to mental health, the issue of climate change, knife crime in London, which is plaguing London heavily at the moment, of course, cut in fundings for youth services. How do you react to that?
Well, so hats off to Boris Johnson's advisors, whether that's Linton Crosby's team or Dominic Cummings, because they've correctly calculated, and this is answering your question, that the issue, possibly the only issue, and it's been the national obsession for several years, is Brexit. And they've drowned everything else out. Now, drowning it out politically and in the theatre of campaigns doesn't mean it's gone away. On the contrary, now all these issues are going to have to be dealt with. I'm afraid, actually, for the next year, Brexit will continue to be a national obsession, but it should be less of a national obsession in the sense that from January we're out, then there's a deal to be done. But there's a whole shopping list of issues that need dealing with. And it's absolutely the case, that the economy is not in rude health. Productivity's down, debt's up. That needs a lot of work. Hopefully Boris Johnson cracks on with that.
We'll have to wait and watch for that. But since I'm running short of time and I have so many things to ask you, how will today's result actually impact the issue of NHS? What happens now? Because Jeremy Corbyn really tried to drum it up into a controversy, but what happens now to the issue of NHS?
The NHS is like a 10-headed massive octopus. It's not going to be changed overnight. It does need to be changed. So I think status quo for now, Akansha.
All right, if that's the status quo out there, let's talk about the other dark horse who's emerged out of this election, and that, of course, I'm talking about is Nicola Sturgeon. She is, of course, saying that, you know, there's been a clean sweep in Scotland. Do you foresee fresh pressure for another referendum on gaining independence from London?
Oh, almost certainly, and she's said it herself on several occasions. I mean, the SNP now is Scotland, to all intents and purposes. Having said all of this,
but will Boris Johnson let that happen?
Well, that's been happening for some time now, and you know, the parlous performance of Labour, people like Jo Swinson losing her seat, you know, they've handed Scotland on a plate in many ways to SNP without taking away the achievements of Nicola Sturgeon. Look, Katja, here's the thing, right? She has a lot of leverage now for referendum 2.0 on Scotland, and of course their story is that they should not be forced out of Europe, right? They've got their own identity. But Boris Johnson has tremendous leverage and a big majority now. So her dark horse is going to meet his white horse in an almighty clash at some point. It's just a question of when.
How will today's result impact the links between England, Scotland and Ireland?
Well, I think there's different dimensions to this. On an economic level and broadly on a social level, there's a huge amount of integration and codependency. And one could not say from an economic standpoint that it would be easy to be Scotland outside of the United Kingdom, okay? Then there are tribal elements, and that's become more prevalent recently. So I think we'll hear a lot of as they said in Macbeth, a lot of sound and fury. Whether it actually signifies anything is another matter.
The sound and fury. And before I quickly let you go, how would you analyse another disastrous performance? And that was, of course, by the Lib Dems.
The only thing that could make Jeremy Corbyn feel better about himself is how badly Jo Swinson and the Lib Dems have done. They don't get many opportunities, and she blew it. Swinson
certainly did.
Swinson down the sinkhole.
You may still empathise with Corbyn, but Swinson, I don't think so.
You may very well empathise with either of them. I'm not sure I'll join you on that.
All right, Jasper, thank you so much for sharing in your precious perspective and for joining us on this live broadcast at Wion.